Let's call this meeting to order, and we'll do some introductions. Start with
Crystal Kennedy.
Austin Davidson.
Pete Peterson.
Amy Solberg.
And in the audience, we have...
An old retired person.
An old retired person.
Dick Brady.
And you, sir?
A young person.
Is Dean on the way, do we know? Or?
Sorting that out. I'll let you know if he comes.
Okay, well, let's start out with some new business here. This is something that we're also going to be discussing at the Legislative Committee meeting, which is, I think, scheduled for the first part of next month. And the first item is that a stamp is not a thing of value. This is currently in state law, if I'm not mistaken. The reason that we didn't allow groups to send out envelopes with stamps on them or just send stamps to voters in the mail during previous vote by mail elections is because actually that would be illegal currently in the state of Alaska. And I think, what is the stamp, 51 or 52 cents now, something like that?
Something like that. I just buy and not know it.
So,
I thought it was by pack, so it's fine.
so that, I mean, and I don't know whether, this is something we think we need to lobby the legislature to change, or whether we think that that's probably a good idea not to have groups sending stamps to voters in the mail. I don't know what the members of the committee think about that particular idea of allowing stamps to be sent to voters. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's a state law, so we would have to lobby the legislature to change that state law.
I believe that's correct.
So would we do that through like the legislative committee or list that as one of our legislative priorities or?
Well, we could do both of those. We could tell our municipal lobbyists that we usually have, on contract for the legislative session, that is an item that we would like them to push forward with legislators. I think it'd probably be the easiest way to do that would be to find a local legislator from Anchorage that might be interested in that and have them introduce a bill like that.
I guess, can I say something?
Yes.
I don't have a strong opinion. It sort of strikes me that's just another way that money will be in politics, and that whichever group it is, then will raise money to do stamps. And so I guess I wouldn't put my energy into working on that because it doesn't feel like, I don't know, but I would want to brainstorm more because I actually don't know a lot about what other jurisdictions have done and, how it turns out. So that'd be kind of interesting if there are other vote by mail jurisdictions and whether they do it and why, and did it really increase voting by a lot? Kind of
I don't know if Washington State or Oregon or some of the other jurisdictions that have vote by mail allow people to mail stamps.
Are the whole state has vote by mail in Washington and Oregon?
And I think Colorado is well now too, and some jurisdictions in Utah, I think, in Salt Lake City, I think, switched to vote by mail.
But you're saying,
Ms. Kennedy?
you're saying that this would be a group that would provide the stamps?
Typically, I think.
They would
and actually-
mail with the ballot?
Actually, I think we
Okay.
were contacted by groups, if I'm not mistaken, or the clerk's office was, to ask if that would be legal, and we checked into it and had to inform them that it was against state law. Because
That's an interesting idea, though.
It's a thing of value, and I think that it's not necessarily in law that says a stamp. You can't send someone a stamp. It says that you can't send a candidate something or a voter something of value to try to influence their vote. It's like back in the good old days in the 1800s when presidential candidates would send people out with silver dollars and tell, buy votes from people. I mean, they actually did that in large numbers, and so if you had enough silver dollars, sometimes you could get elected.
Well, we still do it, it's just a little more subversive.
We do?
In terms of buying votes, I mean, I'm just talking about the money that's wrapped up into campaigning. Anyway.
But Crystal raises an interesting point, because she's talking about like whatever group putting stamps in all the ballots, right? Which is very different than when we've discussed it in the past. We've talked about outside groups who want to independently do their own campaign, and intentionally trying to use that word, I don't know what else to say, to get people to vote.
Right. Which that's all regulated under APOC anyway, so
Right.
that shouldn't really be something that I think we would need to.
But they can't do it now because of the state law. So even if it's regulated by APOC, like if there were a group like, the Alaska Center or whatever the group on the other side would be who wants to, give stamps to the people they want to vote, you can't do it because of the state law.
Right, well,
Even
I
if
don't,
you were
like I said,
APOC compliant.
and I don't have the state law in front of me, but
Yeah.
I think it says that you can't try to influence a person's voter by giving them something of value. And so the definition that would have to be figured out is whether a 52-cent stamp is considered enough of a thing of value to disallow it from groups from sending it to people.
But if I remember correctly, there was somebody, a friend of mine, that wanted to know if he could go door to door and hand out, if he could buy $100 worth of stamps and go door to door and pass them out. And APOC told him, yes, he could.
Really?
And it didn't, and if it was from my campaign, then it had, then he had to contribute it. But if he just wanted, as an individual, to go door to door and pass out a stamp for whoever wanted one, they couldn't stop him from doing so.
So maybe that's how they're interpreting the thing of value. If that doesn't cross that threshold, it'd be interesting.
Well, it could be the money amount, I guess. If it was
Yeah,
$100
right.
versus
Right.
$20,000
versus
worth.
50 cents too.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the amount?
I mean, the
he
amount
spent.
that he was going to be spending, yeah.
It
that's a
seems like the
possibility.
threshold would be the amount spent on the vote, right? Like how much per voter.
Well,
Yeah.
since it's an individual doing it on his own or on their own, I think it would be legal. But if it was a group that organized a bunch of individuals and sent them door to door to give out stamps, I think that might actually cross the
Especially
line.
if you're wearing a campaign button or something,
Mhm.
or handing them a flyer.
But to
I don't
me,
know.
it doesn't seem like it should matter if it's if you're part of the campaign, then you have to report with APOC,
Right.
irrespective of
Right.
whatever.
It would be an
but-
expense of the
Yeah,
campaign.
but it seems to me whether it's an individual or a group, the legal question is whether the stamp is a thing of value.
Right.
I mean, if it's a C4 group, they're allowed to do election work, so it's more just whether it's and maybe they have to record it, but is that stamp a thing of value? It'd be interesting to talk with the APOC, because maybe they don't consider it a thing of value and there's no need to change the state law.
I believe that Barbara Jones is actually, she's not here, she's on vacation in Africa, lucky her today, but
Isn't that amazing?
I believe she has actually contacted APOC and got the ruling that according to the way that they read state statute, that it would be considered a legal action.
Interesting.
So that's why we're discussing that now, and we'll probably continue to discuss that in the legislative committee later on.
Well, maybe we could check back with Barbara, maybe we could circle back with her and get her to.
Yeah, definitely. I have a couple questions for her.
Cool.
Okay. All right, anything else on stamp being a thing of value while we're on this subject? If not, then we'll move down to number 2, permanent absentee voter lists. And I actually did a little bit of research on this this morning, and I've come to find out that there are 7 states where permanent absentee voting is already the law, and those states include Arizona, California, Hawaii, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, and Utah. And there's also an additional 7 states provide permanent absentee voting, but you have to give them a reason. And actually, the state of Alaska is one of those states, along with Connecticut, Delaware, Kansas, Massachusetts, Mississippi, and West Virginia, or no, Missouri. and
Define
West
what you
Virginia.
mean by that?
Yeah, what
Peterson?
kind of reasons?
Does that mean just I can, as a voter, say I want to forever get an absentee ballot and I have to request it each election? Is that what this is?
But you do have to provide a reason, so,
Okay.
you know,
Like
you
what?
say, I'm too old, I don't drive
Yeah,
anymore,
okay.
you know, I'm disabled, legally blind, I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
list of reasons that would allow you to qualify.
And in those states, you're saying that you can do that once and then forever, for all the elections that are vote by mail, or, no, all the elections, I guess, you can do an absentee.
Well, I think this, I think this is in state elections, I don't believe
Yeah.
it would be,
That makes sense.
that states can't supersede federal law, and I don't believe.
No, I think you're right. So the question is whether we would want to do that in Anchorage so that elderly people or people with disabilities or whatever it is don't have to apply each election.
Right, well, since we
Seems reasonable.
already have vote by mail,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's,
Oh,
we
right.
already sort
Right.
of
Yeah, that's what I was
have
trying to
Right.
figure out.
permanent absentee voting already, so
Yeah.
to speak, you know?
Right.
And,
So then what are we considering then?
But absentee, isn't that gonna be more of when you're literally out of state, you're not gonna be in the state? And we don't send out ballots out of state unless they're requested as an absentee ballot. So this way, if there's somebody that, you know, the snowbirds or something, you know, if they're gonna know every April they're still gonna be in Arizona, then they could request to be on that permanent list.
well, and there are thousands that are, you know, head south here sometimes
Right.
about now or next month or something.
So is that the
Is that what
population
that
you were
gets
thinking
to?
of?
Is, yeah, is
Well,
that what that helps?
it's, you know, if you're not required to provide a reason, anybody could do it if they just wanted to get a ballot in the mail and not have to go to the polls to vote. And so it makes it more convenient. They don't have to get off work to vote on a Tuesday or whatever, you know. In some areas, now this isn't generally the case here in Alaska, but in some jurisdictions, the lines are really long.
But we
I
don't
mean,
worry
we're
about
talking
that.
hours
Yeah,
to
This
wait.
is a mail, everybody gets a mail ballot, so this
Here.
isn't really about
Yeah.
convenience, yeah. So how does it benefit us in this state to have a permanent list?
Well, see, right now.
Or in this municipality?
Well, since we have vote by mail, we sort of already have the permanent absentee list. And so but the fact that the state doesn't have it, it's confusing to voters and
Oh,
it's a
because
little
this is listed
inconsistent.
under the legislative committee, so you're presenting that we might ask the state to do this.
Right, well,
Okay.
this might be something that would be introduced in, the
Okay.
same bill that had the thing.
For state
stamped.
elections.
And why do we care if we have vote by mail? Because in state elections for Anchorage residents, they have to go
They
in
go
person.
to a poll.
Okay, I'm getting it
And,
now.
and so we have been getting feedback from people and from groups that there is confusion
Yeah,
from voters.
there is.
Because and some people like the absent or the vote by mail thing so much that they're ticked off that the state hasn't already gone to vote by mail themselves.
Yeah.
And so this is something that will probably need more vetting. But I was just clicked on the Hawaii website, and some of the rules that they have in order to stay on the permanent absentee voting list. You can't fail to return your ballot by 6 p.m. on election day in both the primary and general elections. And you have to register to vote if you register to vote in a different state, you were removed from the list, which is the same thing that we have here in Anchorage. And if you fail to keep your registration updated, you'll be removed from the list. And so they send out voter identification postcard like we do here in Anchorage, and if that comes back, return to sender, then they're removed from the list.
So can I ask Mr. Peterson, so would the request to the state be that we want to eliminate the list of requirements to be able to do permanent absentee voting so that our residents, irrespective of disability or age, could elect to do a permanent absentee voter list? Or
Well,
voter
that's
registration?
something that we would have to discuss, and would probably need a resolution from the overall assembly for that to be some sort of legislative priority, I would imagine.
I guess before we would, I mean, I think it seems like reasonable to consider, but I'd want to know, like, what does the state statute say? What does it require now? What are the things you have to satisfy, and what specifically we'd be asking to change? But in concept, it seems like a decent idea. It would eliminate confusion. I mean, people do, I ran in that special election last summer, and August 7th was the election date, and August 21st was the primary date, and people were incredibly confused, and then they voted for me and vote by mail, or for someone else, and then they had to go to the polls. So anyway, I totally understand. I do, and when I was, I probably unusually got to see the confusion firsthand because I was walking doors and people were like, "Oh wait, where do I go to?"
And they probably thought you were running for state house or
Yeah,
senate or something.
yeah, it was confusing for multiple reasons. But I sort of felt bad for the people running in the primary because I think a lot of people who voted for the vote by mail were like, "Oh, good, I voted."
Done.
And it's like, "Oh, then you vote in a couple weeks." I mean, it was literally 2 weeks later,
Right.
and that's confusing. So, I mean, normally that doesn't happen because normally there isn't a special election, and normally there are different times, and I think it's more clear what's going on. But I can definitely see that. I mean, all the reasons that we went to vote by mail were the same reasons that we would do this.
Right.
But I guess now that Dean's here, maybe we could get his attention.
Well, and so we've been joined by our illustrious counsel, Dean Gates, and we are discussing right now the permanent absentee voter list idea that's on our agenda. And this is something that we're discussing here, but we're also going to be bringing up, be on our agenda for our legislative committee meeting next month.
I have looked into this, so I'm not sure. Is there a specific question that I can search for you for next month?
So do we have questions?
Yeah, I think I have a
Mr.
question,
Dixon?
and Chris will tell me if we're on the same track. But I think the question would be, given that we have vote by mail for muni elections, there's some confusion for state elections that people still have to go to the polls. So should we consider asking the state of Alaska to allow Anchorage residents to opt in to permanent absentee voting? And if so, what would have to change? What do you have to do to be an absentee voter now? And do you have to do it every year? Do you have to be disabled? Do you have to have a certain thing? And how would that have to change to allow Anchorage residents to vote permanently by absentee? Is that?
Well,
Ms. Kennedy?
I think those are definitely some of the questions, but I guess I'm still trying to get at what is the advantage for the voter, particularly when we were talking about the fact that if they don't send in their card every year that verifies that they're still a voter, then they're taken off the list. So to me, the idea of being on the permanent list is it's permanent, at least for a certain amount of time. I mean, the point is people don't want to have to answer all the time. They just want to get their in the mail. They want to get their ballot, and
They
they
don't have
want
to
to be.
answer, right?
They don't want to have to call up and say, "Hey, send me a ballot.
Yep.
I'm on the permanent list." It should be automatic. I think
I think it
to
is.
me that's what that gets at, is the idea that people are automatically going to be sent an absentee ballot. So
Well, they
the
don't have
question
to
is,
they
how
don't have
is
to
that
do
an
anything with their
advantage?
card. If they get their card in the mail and it's the correct address, they don't have to do anything,
Yeah.
and their ballot will come to that same address. But if the card comes back returned to sender, then we know that they must have moved somewhere and not re-registered. And
Okay, so you're saying that's just an internal thing
Yeah.
that happens between
And
the mail, basically, and the state, not the actual resident.
Well, it actually
They're not
happens
filling
here.
anything else out, they're
It
not
happens
making
in
another
both-
phone
it
It
call.
happens here in
Pennsylvania.
Anchorage.
Yeah,
because
oh, I
we
know.
send
Yeah.
out those identification postcards or whatever you would like to call them, you know, about, what is it, 6 or 8 weeks before the election, or is it longer than that?
So,
Amy?
Mr. Chair, we're actually going to send it out. Our plan is around the first week of November, we're gonna send the postcard out,
Wow.
and then we'll get it back. We're a little bit early this year, because we want to give the state time to be able to scan everything and update their registration, because we receive all of our information, like the mailing addresses and everything, from the state.
That's right.
Right. And so that's going out here in the next couple of weeks. I see. All right.
But it's simply.
People are
comes-
gonna think there's a November election.
Yeah, that could create some confusion, that's correct.
I have a question. I'm not too familiar with this detailed state process, but it sounds like it's an opt-in and sort of process, right? You get the card, it's the one to receive an absentee ballot, on that list. You have to opt in every year to get the card, and we're talking about would you like a change so that it's an opt-out process instead. So permanently absentee at the mailing address, and each year if they send the card, that doesn't come back. You stay on that list, you know, changed.
Well,
Sort of like the change that you.
Actually, the current Alaska state law is you can apply for permanent absentee ballot, but you have to give them a reason, and there's a list of reasons that are allowed. And so if you qualify under one of those categories, then you can request a permanent absentee ballot.
For vote by mail, and like Crystal said, what would be the benefit for us in our elections? How that law changed? I'm not sure it would be. We have a Title 28 our election code. We've been going through the whole title. I recall talking about that specifically, but we have been saying, you know, absentee by mail provisions of our code are sort of antiquated now because everybody gets it by mail.
Right.
So why have it? But we do have categories, special needs voting, and that's a little different where so we can draw election workers that way. Do we correctly find all the details?
Yeah, through the chair, so that's correct. For the special needs, an election worker can deliver a ballot and then bring it back to the election center, or someone could be a sponsor and come and grab it from the election center, bring it, and then bring it back to the election center.
And that one is where I think we have certain qualifications to get that service. But I don't think we have one for otherwise vote by mail. I would say that the mailing address is nothing special.
So through the chair, we do have temporary ballot applications, and so if someone is a snowbird or if someone's going to be on vacation, the 3 weeks that before the election, when the ballots are mailed out, then they can apply for that application to have their ballot sent to wherever they're temporarily at.
Or if you work on the slope or are going to be gone during the election or whatever.
But we would do that with our mailing address on this regardless of the states list how they're how elected to be on their permanent absentee list. So divided from what would you
Well,
temporary
I think this would make it more convenient and consistent for the voters so that they would get in the habit of voting through the mail by absentee in all the elections. And so, I think over a period of time that might increase voter turnout. I mean, I think that is the reason that those type of laws are passed, is to make it more convenient for voters so we get more participation.
So ask for next month. I guess for me, the statutes, regulations,
Yeah.
process, the absentee rules.
When we discussed this in the legislative committee, it'd be great if you had done a little research and had some information and some suggestions for us. That would be a good idea.
Is before the next election, right?
Yes, it is. I know it's the first week of November, I think. 6th maybe or something.
What kind of, oh, it's legislative
Legislative.
committee, November 8th.
8th, okay, there you go. So, all right, any other discussion or questions about permanent absentee voter lists? If not, then we'll go to the old business and get a report from Ms. Quinn Davidson on ranked choice voting and what happened with her subcommittee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So John Wilton and Meg Zaltel and a volunteer from the community and I have been working on this along with Barbara. And we finally settled on some language and it's going to be introduced this Friday and we're also having a work session on Friday. So John is in charge of bringing sample ballots. We are hoping we could do this without Barbara because she will not be here. We have had several meetings where we practice with Barbara, so and Dean has been involved too. So hopefully it will go fine, and we'll see if the body's all comfortable with it.
So there was less confusion?
Yeah.
Because it seemed like when the tabulation started, it slowed
very
down
confusing.
really a lot. It got bogged down and people were wondering and had lots of doubts,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think ultimately we'll just have to see if it feels too confusing for everyone. Maybe we don't do it, it's, but I think that what we've worked on the last couple, the last month or two is really making sure that language is like, as Barbara likes to say, a cookbook. So it's really, I tried to focus on that, making that really clear and moving some things around, and Dean helped. And so I think it's much more formulaic now, and it makes a lot more sense reading it and doing it and reading it at the same time. And before, I think the language didn't really reflect in order what you were doing, and that made it really confusing. Because it's confusing even when it's done properly. So I'm hopeful that on Friday it will be more clear.
And, we're only talking about votes from 10 individuals. Imagine how confusing could it be if this was a statewide ballot with ranked choice voting
Yeah.
that actually
Well-
could possibly be on the ballot for us to vote for.
And I
they're
think
collecting
it's just about
signatures on
getting
it.
the system down, and once you get it down, whole states do this, so it's definitely doable. It's just that it's it's confusing when you're first learning it, I think, and it's confusing for us because we have to learn how to actually implement it and make sure Barbara understands it. I think for voters, ranking who you're interested in and knowing that those are weighed isn't super confusing, But yeah, I hear your point.
Ms. Kennedy?
And I think if we were to do it in terms of the volume that they do in states, you're going to have a computer that does all that. You're just
Exactly.
inputting your cards that have all those choices on it. But for us, it is a little more. You get to see the
Hands-on.
mess a little bit more. The sausage making, so to speak, because you're having to do it just very manually. So that's why I think it obviously takes longer and it's a little more confusing. But I will say that, I appreciate just working on the idea of having a better process, something that we go into ahead of time knowing how things are going to go. I don't necessarily know that everybody will support this particular process, but at least it's something to really look at and say, okay, is this the process we want? Because we know we need one. We need something better than anybody's had in the past. So thanks for all that work, and I'm sure sometimes it hurts your head when you're trying to
Yes.
figure out how will people take this. If I say it this way, will they get it?
And so your group has got some language that you're going to be introducing, or you put together. Dean has put together already.
Well, so Dean and I, have been working on this together, and I think I'm waiting, Dean, for you to give us the final, right?
Yes, I've planned edits today, so I was waiting till after last night's meeting. I think the important thing is the language is clear enough that any election official will be able to really understand and apply it consistently. Barbara's gone through the exercise, so she understands, but it needs to be written so that anybody in the future is responsible for it can follow it and apply it the same way. I think it's might be too much to hope for that everyone would understand, but what is important is that everyone would trust that it is a good system and the results of the election. And so I think that's probably the greater challenge. We might have perfect language, but still have some mistrust and right choice for tabulation, because it all happens after casting your ballots down and the programs through 7 tabulations, that's results, and for people that question results, they dig into the language and the process that like verify and validate because it's consistently that it works. But so that's really the ultimate goal. But I think it's a bit much over that everybody, all voters, would understand how it works. So.
Well, and one of the important things to me was making it relatively evident that someone couldn't game the system by changing the way they ranked people. And I suppose you could still do that if there was some person on the list that you thought other members of the assembly were going to be supporting that you were in favor of. You might rank that person last to try to so that they wouldn't be moving forward because they would come up with someone's second choice or something. Ms. Kennedy?
No, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be my question is, how does this really work in terms of being something that is credible, that people will trust? And are there ways to game the system? And have you guys had any conversations like that to say, well, if somebody, if you're a good poker player, maybe you'll figure this out. And especially in a small group, I don't think it works that well on a large scale, but for 10 people, it probably could. So did you have any?
I think
ultimately,
close,
Dean could weigh in too, but I think ultimately the idea is that whoever wins ends up having the most support from the most people. And so if you game that by not supporting someone you didn't want to support, that doesn't feel like too much gaming. Do you know what I mean? Like, overall, the person who wins is going to have the most support from the most members. And
I suppose it could backfire too if you thought you were gaming the system and everybody else did too.
Right.
Then I guess nothing would come out right. But so I do have another question, if you don't mind, and that is, if you are you're putting down your first, second, third choice, and for the most part, I think most of us would probably think, well, I should at least get my third choice, right? So if that doesn't happen, then people tend to go, well, wait a minute, what happened? How could it have turned out so off from what I was hoping it would be? I mean, is there any explanation for that when that happens, or is that's just the way it is? You're just so far out there that nobody else thinks.
Yeah, I mean, I think say there are 6 candidates and you vote for the 3 most conservative and I vote for the 3 most progressive, but so do many of my colleagues, and a progressive person wins.
That makes sense.
It makes sense, right? I mean, it's maybe not what you want, but it's reality. And so, this isn't going to make it so that everyone's candidate wins. It's just going to make it so that, if maybe yours, who was your third place, was my third place, because that person was more on moderate and we liked that person more. And, and it's so close that in the end that matters, that third place vote. So
yeah, and I suppose even when it's your 6th choice that wins, it's because it just worked out that way with everybody else, and that's just
and ultimately, if you have more people who are going to vote for someone, that person's going to be more likely to win, no matter what system you use, and they should be, because that's how it works.
True. Right, makes sense.
Well, and it might be years and years and years before we ever get in a situation where we have a large enough group or an equal group of candidates that there's widespread support for more than one. Who knows? When we were trying to fill the Eagle River seat temporarily, was there 8 or 9 candidates? And so I thought we were going to be there forever that day, and it turned out the Gretchen one on the first ballot. I was actually pretty surprised about that.
Me too.
And then when we had the 2 people and it was tied and it went on and on and on, I was actually pretty surprised about that as well. So it's hard to sometimes predict.
Try doing 32 in the Anchorage School.
32 people.
We had 32 people. I think that was the one that Tim Steele won.
Wow.
How can you even evaluate? I mean, that's I guess it's like a job interview where
Geez, that's more people that show up at most community councils. Mr.
I was
Gates?
going to say we had a municipal election where there were 7 or 8 candidates, but I can't talk Crystal's.
Like 32.
But anyway, I think that relevant to that discussion in the compensation system and all that is that Maine has adopted ranked choice voting for its general KH1 for the statewide election.
The state of Maine?
Like 1077. State of Maine.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And then there was like 10 US cities or more that have adopted ranked choice voting, and a couple of surveys or studies of the voters before and after they implemented ranked choice voting. And the interesting thing from these surveys, is that people appreciated it because they felt that the campaigns and candidates had less negativity and I guess there was less smear campaigns and that kind of thing. They were more civil among the candidates, and that's interesting because I didn't think about it as being possible effects, but and in general, I guess some surveys said a lot of voters liked it afterwards. So there was some data in the surveys and studies that I first time, and that's just helpful for people to see. I just not being the first out this frontier, you can see how it's been implemented in other jurisdictions.
You brought up a good point that I hadn't thought of, that there might be less negative campaigning with ranked choice voting, because some candidates might be worried that if they did too much negative campaigning, that they would be, number 4 or 5 or whatever, instead of number 2, or if they want somebody's first choice. And that actually is a pretty good selling point, because I think there's a reasonable number of people out there that are really tired of hearing and seeing all the negative campaign ads. At least I know I'm not really too enthusiastic about negative campaigning myself, although if it didn't work, people would do it. But, so that's something I hadn't thought of. Ms. Kennedy?
Yeah, and I think it does work, like I said, for bigger groups. When you have a higher volume of voters, it seems to me that's something that people really would like to see happen, because you can't really you can't necessarily get a good picture of candidates sometimes when they're in a bigger race, more high profile race, a mayor race, a governor race, where you're really looking at people that you may not know at all,
right.
Who are running. And that way you might say, well, I kind of like this, I kind of like that. And anyway, so I think it probably would be really helpful. So I'm interested. Try it for mayor, right?
Or presidential primary with 22 candidates in it.
Well, that's a little out of the ordinary, but
But it would help. I mean,
Yeah,
it would
it
make
would.
it less about, oh, I don't like this and it's like, oh, it's so negative. Who do you like? Oh, these are my top 5 or
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
I like that.
and that typically happens with a group that big. You like something about this person,
Yeah,
you like
exactly.
something else about somebody
Yeah.
else, but you got to pick one,
Mhm.
and that makes it harder. But
Mhm.
anyway.
Dean's turn.
Mr. Gates?
Yeah, someone mentioned that tries for the mayoral election, and to do that, I think we need a charter amendment.
Got it. Yeah, I don't think we're going to decide that here.
Yeah. And I could add that Matt, who brought this to us, he actually mentioned that. Like, do you think there would be an interest in doing this on a broader scale? And John and I both responded to him that, we just got vote by mail. We're getting used to that. We're going to make this change. We want to see how it works. That we didn't think that right now was the right time to make that change or propose it, if at all, if that was right anyway. But Matt was saying, it could really save you money in a sort of the reason to do it.
Exactly.
Well, and so I think there could be, an initiative on the ballot statewide for us to vote on. I think, are they out for collection signatures, or has that been certified yet? Does anyone know?
Wait, what did you say?
The
The
rank-
statewide
ranked choice voting?
Well, they tried to do it, but then I think the governor said it was not okay.
Would be the lieutenant governor, yeah.
Okay, I don't know, maybe not. Dean seems to know.
I hope I'm not confusing this with another initiative. I
Yes.
think this is the one that the lieutenant governor said no, but
Yeah.
it was appealed to the
And they're
court.
appealing it,
And then
yeah.
the court said, while they're considering the question, that they can start collecting signatures. So it's still subject, I think, to the judge's decision whether the vote can be certified. I'm not confusing it with a different
No,
initiative.
you're right. That's my
Yeah, I think she
perception
might
too.
be correct. I know there's at least a couple different initiatives that are out there that are, in the works, either collecting signatures or hoping to collect signatures. Ms. Kennedy?
I was going to say, in a partisan race, I don't think it actually makes as much sense to do it because you're usually whittled down to just a couple of candidates. And in a primary, it seems to me each party runs their own primary, right? They could decide to do that regardless of what state law is.
That's true.
But in a nonpartisan race, where you do have, 8, 10, 12 candidates, then it probably would make sense. So it really almost comes back down, it really almost comes back down to the assembly, the municipality to kind of make that decision to see if in a nonpartisan race, we would be allowed to do that. So obviously, I don't know, maybe, do we have to have, might be a Dick Cheney question. Do we have to have, okay, Dean, do we have to have state authority or permission to regulate our municipal elections? Is it really done through the state down to our level?
No, we run our own elections how we want, but there are
Interesting,
some
okay.
state laws that apply to mostly, I think, the election offices that apply. And then we also are required to use, we can't maintain our own voter registration database. So we have to use the state's
Okay.
voter registration list. So we're sort
That's
of
not
bound
ideal.
by their interior list. Those are the two restrictions I can think of one. But
Can I
Ms. Davidson?
comment, and then I know we probably will, but so I'm not totally familiar with the state one, but I think part of the idea is to not have primaries that drive voters, that drive whichever party it is to the extreme side of their party. And so, here you have maybe really extreme Republicans getting selected. And then, but you have it, in other places where it's Democrat, right? So you're seeing the sort of race to the top or the bottom, depending on how you look at it, with the Democratic field. And the idea is if you have ranked choice voting, you don't have to do that because you might end up with someone more moderate. And I think that's the reason, my guess is that the governor doesn't like it on a statewide level, is that it would make it more moderate. And here, it's the reason that maybe some of our colleagues don't like it. I like it anyway, because I think that we should be like that. But for the vacancy thing, is that ultimately you will select someone that's more moderate, and that is how ranked choice voting works, and that's the purpose. And so, because you have more people's buy-in. So anyway, I think that's why it's disfavored at the state level. But
Well, here in Alaska, we used to have an open primary where all the candidates who were running were on the same ballot. There wasn't a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot or a Libertarian ballot or anything. It was everybody who's running for this office, they're all on the list, and so you voted for them. And that got changed because some groups thought that too many moderates were
Exactly.
being elected, and they saw that as a bad thing, and so then they went to separate party primaries. And so I think that has sort of helped to create this unfortunate divide we have politically in this country, where you have one group that sees the other group as the enemy all the time, and it's like constant war, and there's less working across the aisles than there used to be. I mean, it's actually changed quite a bit even in the last decades. So it's, I mean, it is what it is. But I think a person could make the case that changing our primary from open to specific party primaries is maybe exacerbated that problem. Mr. Gates.
I just wanted to mention, I was looking up the initiative for Frank Truthful and Statewide is the one that was rejected as a constitutional principle, and I was actually interested in collecting it.
So they're out there collecting them now?
Yeah, they have to collect 28,501 before the start of the legislative session. I have no idea where they're at or how soon the judge is expected to render a decision.
I haven't heard anything.
I haven't seen anybody in front of me in the grocery stores or anywhere.
They might have already did they collect a lot? Anyway, we're really out there now, but
So,
maybe they already got much.
so anything else about ranked choice voting that we want to discuss while we're here today, or should we move on down the old business and see if we have any other additional?
Yeah, I think we should move on.
Any information about election charter changes?
I think that might be what Forrest and Barbara and I were working on. Are you raising your hand, Dean, or are you just no?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, Dean and Barbara and Forrest and I were working on this. She wanted to change. She could better explain it, but basically wanted to change some of the time limits to be a little longer because with vote by mail we weren't able to meet some of the charter deadlines if certain circumstances happen, like if someone did it at the very end of the timeline, or I can't remember all the reasons to be honest, but we came up with a draft. But Barbara said, you know, this isn't urgent, it's just best practices to change it, and if we have a really, really long ballot with all kinds of stuff on it, that's expensive and overwhelming for people. So we have a draft, but we're kind of waiting to see how the ballot shakes out and whether it's a priority to put that on there.
I see.
So I think she wanted to circle back in December or something.
Well, you know,
Randy, is that-
we did pass an AO to change some of the dates here. Was that 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago?
It was a month ago.
Yeah.
And actually, that had been in the works for, I don't know, 7 or 8 months, I think, before we finally got all the numbers figured out and tried to make it possible for the printer to get the ballots done in time so that we
Yeah.
could mail them out. It was because it was pretty tight last spring to get those ballots printed in time to get them sent out on the day that we were, planning to send them out.
And Dean might have more info on. He'll remember since he drafted it.
Not much
exactly.
more. I think that our draft ordinance for setting the charter amendments questions the voters and the changes which was done. Or AO was done. I think we just needed to do an AO, not the right also waiting until December and see how crowded it looks. And that's not working. And then I also that ordinance that we passed last month or two ago, and this charter amendment ordinance, I think they're both sort of became necessitated by our changing the election system from a single election day to absentee or no voting allowed to vote by mail or some ballots 3 weeks before the actual election day. So a big change from a single polling place election. So these time frames just need some adjustments, I think, for administrative convenience and efficiency.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm relatively certain we're going to have a long ballot this year because the on-site marijuana item itself is going to be at least close to a page if I'm looking at it.
Although once it's in one of those columns, they kind of shrink it down, right? Because there's like several columns on the ballot page.
Yeah, but if you make it too small, then people can't read the ballot,
Oh,
Amy?
you might have some.
Through the chair. So What we do is typically it's the 2 columns, and I think the lowest font we could go was 9 point, and
That's
that
very
was
small.
pushing it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out.
So,
Okay,
yeah,
so that's all I have
some
on that.
people would be having to vote with a
Right,
magnifying
yeah, that's not
glass.
good.
And that might not promote vote by mail very
No,
well.
I would not.
So, yeah, and, you know, you don't want to have to go to 2 pages because then your postage to send out all those ballots basically doubles.
Well,
And so-
unless they're all under the same Post-it, you know what I mean? Like, you can mail a certain number of pages before.
Well, it's all about the weight
Well,
of the
yeah.
envelope, is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair, it's the weight of the envelope and the thickness and all of that.
Yeah, but I mean, could you add another page without the postage going up?
Through the chair, I think the postage, it would accrue a cost for that if you did add another
It
page.
would,
And
okay.
then you would have the printing cost, and then
Yeah.
when it comes back to us, we'd have to separate them and make sure that we had more workers and make sure it was all correct. And so
Yeah.
it would accrue a
Yeah,
cost.
the county would take additional time
Yeah.
and there'd be additional election workers that would have to be hired. And so, yeah, it would, I mean, it obviously could be done, but it's not optimal.
Yeah.
Mr. Gates?
I think that Mrs. Jones did a cost estimate, at least for the postage, with the added second page. The thing said, she was perhaps separate about, but when the next page she can tell us, she had to do a cost estimate.
Well, it'd be tens of thousands of dollars at minimum, you know. And so, Ms. Kennedy?
Well, that kind of, maybe you're actually saying this already too, but does it also cost somebody more postage to mail in a ballot that's bigger? Will there be extra postage required?
Yeah, that's actually something I hadn't thought of. Amy?
Through the chair, so last year and the year before, if somebody did leave their sticker on their security envelope that they returned,
Yeah.
it did cost more. So it
That
did
was
push
enough to
over.
tip it?
That was enough. It all depended on how much people sent
That's pretty
in
extreme.
besides, because it was way just enough over to where it cost them a little bit more.
Wow, didn't
So-
know that.
So does that mean we have to monitor that in terms of people that would be mailing their ballot back, if it's actually gonna be bigger than last year's ballot?
So is that something that we do before we mail out the ballot, is put it in the envelope and weigh it to see if it's gonna get only need one stamp for them to send it in? Or have we done that in the past?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't believe we did that in the past, but it just turned out to where if somebody turned in their ballot and their ballot envelope, or the secrecy sleeve into their ballot envelope and turned it in, it was underneath, it was under the weight, and they could actually it would cost one stamp. And so our language, what we tell people is it costs about a stamp. So we might have to have more education out there to say that it may cost more than just one stamp.
Well, and so that would encourage people to use those drop boxes that we have more of every election. I think we're headed to 16 now, is that correct?
That's correct. So we are getting 2 more. We're getting 2 bigger ones, and we're going to have it at the library and the Eagle River Town Center.
Cool, Ms. Kennedy?
Just kind of following up then, when you did get those envelopes back that were extra postage, then the muni had to pay that to the post office, correct? Is that how that worked?
Through the chair, I'm not sure how that worked. I think that would be a question for Barbara. Yeah, so that would be a question for Barbara.
Because somebody pays, and they don't necessarily, I wouldn't think that sometimes they do, they send it back to the sender.
Return to
I mean,
sender.
I've gotten stuff back that says extra postage needed, and anyway. Yeah, that'd be something to maybe follow up on and monitor.
We'll have to remember to ask Barbara that at our next meeting
Yeah, what do we do?
next month, when she's going to be showing us her pictures from Africa. But we are getting near the end of our meeting. Do we have any public audience participation out there?
I hate to, but you brought up the issue of closed primaries.
This
That
is
was completely
Mr. Trady,
done.
for the
Name's
record.
Dick Trady. That was completely done by the Republican Party. Randy Rick wanted to purify who was running as Republican. So they went to closed primaries. That was his whole thing.
The name on that, I missed it.
Randy Rudrick, who's your Republican chairman.
Former state chair, right?
Yeah. And relative, back to rank voting, that was a big thing by Disco Ray Metcalf.
Disco
He
Ray.
pushed that. Remember Disco Ray?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He pushed that. He wanted the somebody to do rank voting. And in talking to our union cohorts, they did not want to see that happen. So we kind of sent that to the sideline. So he wanted to have it done everywhere.
May I ask
Ms.
Mr.
Kennedy?
Trainee a question? So do you remember what the rationale was behind that, why the pushback?
They were concerned about who was going to be running, and they wanted to make sure that, from their perspective, they were not going to have unfriendly union, anti-union people on the assembly. Do you remember AO 37? We turned out 1,050 people's testimony on that. And that polarized the sides. For those who were there, it was nights of testimony. They wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. They were concerned that Disc Ray was trying to do that by getting rank voting. So at the assembly level, you could do rank voting, but not citywide. And that was Ray's thing, was to go citywide rank.
Do you think that was a fair correlation? That,
At the time, yeah.
Okay.
Of course, I've been called all sorts of things progressive. I've been called a communist. What the heck? I've been called everything in the book. Anyway, you
it's
guys
all
take
about
care.
timing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Trainee, and I think we've reached the end of our time. Let's adjourn at 4 minutes after 1.